And on that note, I don't think we could have a better start than talking about collective creativity, not just how to investigate it, but also what it actually is and what it takes to create it. Because I think there's one thing that the IMC has been trying to do is to be a space, a creative space, within which collective creativity, whatever that means, might somehow develop. And we probably couldn't have found a better person than Kristian to talk about it. So Kristian, please take us away. I'm going to run out at about 12 o'clock, but it's not going to mean that I won't want to hear the rest of the talk. But Kristian, we're all yours.
Thank you, Andreas. And thank you for the invitation to share some ongoing work still in progress. I recognize that a few of you have seen an earlier version of this talk. I hope that you won't be too bored. But I'm going to report today from two projects that are both still ongoing. They are trying to kind of tap into this phenomenon of collective creativity. And creativity is a difficult area to address. It just seems to be such a strange, intangible and fluffy concept. So just as important as it seems to be for really understanding humans and what's happening around us, just as difficult is it to study it. Sometimes we talk about creativity as a quality or maybe even a personality trait of particular individuals. Sometimes we talk about it as some kind of property of an end product, a very creative solution or object or artwork or something like that. And sometimes we talk about creativity as a property of some kind of process, unfolding process. And I'm going to mainly address this idea here in particular with the recognition that a lot of context in which we observe creativity unfolding is actually in these types of collaborative context where several people are somehow engaged in doing stuff together. And when they do that, new ideas arise or new products emerge or artworks and so on and so forth. There are a tradition, of course, of looking at creativity in cognitive science and psychology, and one of the forerunners of this field is Skilford, who back in the old days here started developing ideas about how we could potentially systematically try to address creativity as a field within cognitive science or psychology. And he coined a distinction between divergent and convergent thinking, two different, we say, modes of cognition, where divergent thinking would be what happens whenever we are faced with some kind of task that requires to try to multiply candidate solutions. So this kind of searching for many different ideas or solutions to a prompt, that requires to multiply the strategies that we or the approaches that we have available. And he contrasted that to convergent thinking, which is kind of the opposite direction here, where we are trying to hone in on this kind of one optimal solution, which requires to do different kind of things. It's kind of related to decision making, for instance. It's often associated with logical problem solving kind of things. And what has kind of happened in the field is that pretty much nowadays many people would equate creativity with this aspect, divergent thinking, while other people would talk about convergent thinking as more or less as synonym with intelligence, actually. Interestingly so. But there's also with this some suggestions for how we can then go and study something like creativity or creative processes, and Guilford himself has suggested a particular set of experimental methods that can be used here, and one of them is the alternative uses test, which has kind of become, if there are any standards in creativity research, maybe this could be, we could think about this as one standard, which is, you have a particular prompt, you just ask people to come up with as many alternative ways to use a particular object as possible, and then in some kind of set time frame. So it could be that you're provided with a coffee mug, and now you have to list all the alternative ways that you would possibly use a coffee mug, and you could say, oh, it could maybe be a small soup bowl, or a plant pot, or a scoop for making big barrels of oats, or a hat for an elf in a thunderstorm, and so on and so forth, right? Then you can list all kind of suggestions here, and some people would come up with a long list of very different things. Some people would come up with a shorter list. Here's another kind of version of the same type of idea, where you're presented with circles, and then you have to fill them in as many different ways as you can think of. Then afterwards, as you can imagine, follows some work, right, in annotating these, and typically they are then coded for fluency, which is the number of distinct ideas that you present either in your list here or over here. The originality of these solutions. So some of these would, like a small soup bowl, maybe many people would come up with that idea, but maybe the elf hat, fewer people would think of that. And last but not least, they're coded for flexibility, and so you could have many really closely related solutions, right? So you can make a long list where you are still treating the coffee mug as a container for something, right? But there could also be like ideas that are really kind of very different from each other. But overall, as you can imagine, there are some challenges here, right? We actually don't know what kind of solution space that we are dealing with here. It's a very undefined space, right? So it's actually difficult to know if one solution is very original, for instance, and in terms of flexibility, how much of the space are we actually covering with these ideas up here. The same goes here. It's difficult to annotate, right? So how different are these guys here, right? And the moment that you start to use something like this or this, is that one idea, or is it in fact three ideas? And so it's yeah, creativity is really difficult to measure. I guess that's the idea. There are also other kind of ideas in the field treating or addressing or approaching creativity from a more computational point of view. Thinking about creativity as a search process. Here, one of the kind of pioneers is Stuart Kaufman, who is one of these types of people who kind of keep up showing up in all kind of fields. I think he's a physicist by training, but has done really interesting work across many fields. He has introduced the concept of the adjacent possible, which is kind of an expression of how particular cognitive processes can unfold. The idea here is to endorse this kind of metaphor of creativity as search within some kind of space of possible solutions. And here's you would say an illustration that Vittorio Loreto, another friend of the house here, is kind of presented at TED Talk. But the idea is that you will have many ideas or solutions that you're kind of addressing, and as you kind of start to reach the outskirts of your space of possible ideas, new ideas might open up. So as every time you kind of come to the boundaries of, you could say, your space of solutions, right? You are able to suddenly see a new solution that you couldn't, that wasn't within sight or within your search space a moment ago. These ways of thinking about creative search often makes this kind of distinction between various types of phases of search. Sometimes we call those exploration and exploitation, and it kind of thinks about cognitive search in terms of this idea of a space of possible solutions, and it could be something like that. Sometimes you have quite different ways to present this graphically, but one is this kind of rocked space where you might have some kind of starting point and you start searching for ideas, and it may be that you're inclined to go straight to the first idea that comes to mind, right, and think, oh, I found the solution now. But what can happen if you kind of keep on searching a little bit is that you might eventually figure out that there are actually better solutions to your problem if you just keep searching, right? And sometimes we think or discuss these kind of situations in terms of exploitation and exploration, where exploitation is going for the kind of local neighborhood and going for those kind of immediate solutions that present themselves, while exploration is this process of sometimes actually even escaping the attraction to the local candidate solutions and trying to also go and search more in more distal parts of the solution space. So yeah, so the optimal solution might be the highest point here, and sometimes you cannot see what is hidden there in the outskirts of the space before you kind of start exploring. Yeah, so exploitation, going for the local attractor, exploration, like the more wide search, going for the moving away sometimes from what appears to be the otherwise very kind of readily available solution. Again, this idea of searching locally and sometimes globally and something like that gives rise to sometimes to patterns that we recognize in other parts of human and animal behavior generally. We can think about mental search as some kind of foraging process, foraging for information. And there are actually people who have tried to formalize these things by introducing particular types of random walk patterns that has been observed in the way that animals forage for food. There's a particular kind of phenomenon called a levy flight, where a particular search pattern can involve a number of very small kind of distances where you may go and exhaust a neighborhood for food sources, right? Then as you're kind of, as the resources get more and more exhausted, you make a longer jump and you find a new neighborhood and you start to do local search there. And it actually appears that often when we are tasked with some kind of mental task of coming up with a number of solutions to a task, we tend to do something like this. So you can imagine, for instance, that I ask you to list all the cities of Jutland. One kind of a way to approach a task like that could be to start with Aarhus and then take a few of the local neighborhoods here before making maybe a jump south or wherever you want to go, right, and explore a little bit in this fashion. And there's actually some memory literature that suggests that this is that we can observe something like this as kind of an emergent, you could say, behavior of search across a number of fields. The idea has been has been applied also to a creative process by some of my collaborators. Here they developed this very simple paradigm for studying very open-ended creative processes. So here the task is to, from the starting point here, these 10 little bricks, to build interesting and beautiful figures. So the participant can just drag these around, and there's a few constraints. So it's made so that you cannot separate the figure, right? It has to be a coherent figure, so there's a few moves that are not possible. You cannot break it to become two figures. But the idea is that every time you find something that you think, oh, this looks kind of interesting, you can go and collect this shape to your gallery. So you, during the maybe 20 minutes of gameplay here, create some figures that you then save, and then in some versions of this game later on you may go and rate your figures or do something else too. But a very open-ended task, right? But the good thing is here that the space is relatively well defined in this case. There's only a limited, although many figures possible, and that we are actually now able to not only consider the creative in this kind of offline way where we look at all the products and try to kind of quantify aspects of them, but we can now also collect like on a quite high temporal spatial resolution, like move for move, how the process is unfolding, right? So in this game there's actually a finite number of possible shapes. I think at this point in time, through many hundreds of games, I think we're only still at something like less than 10,000 of these have been discovered, you would say, so there's still room to discover. And interestingly, we can, from this game, quantify a number of aspects of the unfolding process. So what often happens here is that you can enter into some kind of regime where you find some figures and that you find interesting, and we can actually, from move-to-move dynamics, algorithmically recognize phases of exploitation and exploration. So sometimes we would have people who kind of enter into some kind of domain of related figures that they tend to find interesting, either kind of these more abstract figures, or in some cases leather-like figures or little aeroplanes or something like that. And what often happens is that then they would go and harvest a few of those before they then wander into the darkness, so to speak. That means that they kind of start exploring without maybe any particular direction or idea in mind, until they enter into some kind of new phase of exploitation. So we can algorithmically recognize these phases by looking at the actual path that people would take to get from one figure to another figure, and compare that to the optimal path. And sometimes when people are exploring, they are not really kind of aiming straight for the next figure. They are kind of just moving around blocks, and then suddenly they find something that they like and they start exploring. And that has been kind of measured over a number of games, and it has been validated also with human ratings and stuff like that. And what we observe is, as I was saying, that there seem to be these kind of domains that you can enter. They can be kind of abstract shapes or animal-like shapes, for instance, or sometimes letters. And there's, for now, kind of a set of these type of clusters that with shapes that seem to kind of be related, that seem to be attractors or little hills in this kind of solution space, that when people discover them or enter there, they tend to do a few of them before they leave and go and explore different parts of the space here. And that makes it possible then, to both, you could say, quantify some of the traditional measures of fluency and originality, but also to get kind of a better handle on the process itself and aspects of that. And this is what we've been interested in with a group here of collaborators. So first of all, Leonore, who's also a good friend of the house here and who has visited at many occasions, but also now Rosenberg, who's just finished his PhD, among other things, doing some of these stuff. And then we have a number of people, faces here, some of you of which you might recognize, who are students from Buchanan. And what we did was we evolved a collective version of this. Oh, that's kind of a little bit loud. But the idea here is just to move this game to a large touchscreen, which makes it possible for people to collaborate on this task. So we had a number of dyads or hairs who came into the laboratory, and we also collected a baseline of individuals doing the task on this screen here. And then we made two versions of the task. A version that was very close to the original one, very open-ended, but also a one where we provided feedback. So we gave them a running score. Sorry, if I could make the sound go away here, I would, but apparently you need to. Okay, that's fine. But also, we gave them a running score, which was an expression of the originality, so based on the last, I think, 5 submissions or 5 figures that they had saved. So we had kind of every minute some kind of update of an originality score in a feedback condition that would give them, you could say, change the task so that there was now also kind of a more explicit value criterion. So in the original open-ended task, right, you are the only one to judge whether a product is interesting or not. But now we also have a version of it where you get a little bit of an explicit external value criterion. So what happened here, of course, as you can imagine, probably is that you put 2 people in front of this screen, you only give them the instruction that they should make beautiful, interesting figures. And many things can happen, right? So if you're a single participant, it's kind of obvious what to do. If you're 2 people, you have to figure out how you want to coordinate to solve this task. And what we could see from the video footage here is that there was many solutions to that. So people had very different styles of interaction here, and we kind of got curious about the extent to which properties of the interaction could actually influence how the creative search would unfold, right? So if there would be this kind of relationship between how you interact and how you actually search the space for solutions. So we decided to dig a little bit into that, and that can be quite painstaking if you want to second by second annotate everything that goes on. We had kind of a handle on it, so we started at for now, and we might eventually evolve on this, but we started asking who actually is doing the individual block moves. So you have 2 people in front of them, right, and we can take block by block and ask who is actually contributing to the very practical creation of figures here. And so we had a student coding that in this particular case, participant A is doing 3 block moves, right? Then B is doing 1, A is doing 4, B is doing 1, and then they save the figure. That could be one situation. Here's another one where A is doing a lot of moves, A is doing 1, B is doing a lot, and so on and so forth. We can, with these kind of annotations, we can go and look at what is the probability if A just made one move that the next one would be also A or would be B, and so on and so forth. And with these transition probabilities, we can for every game, we can calculate a particular kind of profile of the interaction of the participant, and what we did then was some unsupervised clustering, and what we can get from this is to kind of get some large-scale interaction styles. So from all the different pairs, look at what are the kind of attractors, you could say, in terms of different ways to organize themselves. And here's an output of the k-means clustering we tried with different numbers of clusters. This gave very nice, well separated clusters, and what we observe here is that there are one solution that come up in quite a bit of cases, and that is that one participant can just do all the moves. That's a very kind of simple solution, of course. We call it dominance here, and so all the blue here means that a particular participant A has actually made all the moves before they save this figure here, or sometimes there's an occasional move maybe by the other participant, but really one is kind of dominating, and of course we have two versions of this. Participant A moves all of them, or participant B moves all of them. But we also saw another kind of interesting solution to the coordination problem, and that is that we can kind of divide labor between us, so that first I would move around some blocks and we'll save that, and then I'll leave the floor, and my partner comes in and moves around some blocks and saves the figure. and that's, you would say, very democratic. Maybe it's not what we exactly had in mind. We wanted to study co-creation, right? But indeed that also occurs. So something like this turn-taking like or co-creation like pattern definitely also, this is the cluster here, appears maybe a little bit less frequent than we had imagined, but here I move one, my partner moves one, I move one, my partner moves one, and then we save the figure, and then we are, that's kind of the dominating pattern here. And we'll introduce this complexity also in the analysis in a moment. Now, how do we then get some variables from this game? So remember, we had a situation like this. We could do sometimes have a succession of moves where there was a lot of little figures saved in a short time here, these exploitation phases, right? And then we can have a situation where people go and search for a long time before they find something that, those things that we call exploration phases. And actually, if we take the number of moves in that we can identify in exploitation, or here we call it scavenging, but it's the same thing here, and the number of moves that we observe in exploration phases, it appears that we have this phenomenon where a group would often, or an individual would often have these correlated to a certain extent. But from this kind of map where we look at how many moves do they have when they explore and how many moves do they have when they exploit, we can kind of calculate two variables. One is the what we could call the exploration ratio. So the more this angle here leans towards the lower end, the more the pair or individual explores relative to exploits. So this would be one of our variables here, an expression of what is the balance between exploration and exploitation, right? And lower values means that you explore more, higher values that you exploit more. But we can also calculate kind of the length of the graph here, which is another kind of complementary measure of what we could think of as preservation or flexibility. So when you enter, for instance, a phase of exploitation, do you tend to stay there for a long time, do 6 airplanes before you move on and do something new, or do you do 2 airplanes and then you are off to something new, right? So, and this is kind of another variable that we can gain from these numbers here. Apart from that, we can look at fluency. That is just the number of gallery figures that participants save. Of course, keeping in mind that it's not an explicit instruction this time around to do as many as possible. But with the alternative users test, you're explicitly tasked with doing many solutions. Here, it's up to you, right? But still, we chose to look at this. And then we can actually look at originality as well. We have a large corpus of figures that people have made with this game, and we can calculate how frequent these figures are. So some figures are made by really almost anyone who plays the game, right? But there's also many figures that are unique, right? That only appear once. So let's look at some results here. First, we'll look at this what we call the exploration ratio, right? Remember that's the angle here. So a lower number means more exploration. And first, if we look at the compare simply the groups and the individuals, we observe that the groups overall have has a tendency to explore slightly more than individuals. So this is credible, although it's not a super strong effect. And you can see that the moment that we provide feedback, some of this effect kind of disappears, and then we can discuss that later on. But we can also break it up and look at these different types of interaction that we observed occurring here. And without going too much into detail, we can see that those people who do this kind of co-creation or turn-taking, they seem also to be the ones that are doing more exploration, while the other kind of interactive patterns here, dominance and division of labor, relatively are more inclined to exploit more. So there seems to be some kind of relation between how you interact and the kind of search pattern, the style of cognitive search that unfolds here. And if we now compare the individuals with those who actually do this co-creation thing, then we have a quite strong difference, right, with really a lot more exploration going on. Then let's move to preservation or flexibility, or we're not sure exactly what to call it, but this propensity to stay in a phase for shorter or longer time, right? And here again, a lower number means that you're more flexible, that you're kind of moving on faster, not kind of staying and exploiting for a long time. And here again, we observe that overall groups seem to have a more flexible behavior. They, and this is quite credible, they stay shorter in the phases here relative to individuals who sometimes have a tendency to really either stay in exploration or in exploitation for very extended periods of time. Breaking it up, we again have kind of a similar pattern that those who do this kind of co-creation or turn-taking are the ones that also display the most flexible behavior in this case, and quite credibly more flexible than the individuals here. Fluency, maybe not too surprising. Individuals are more fluent, they produce more figures in 20 minutes than groups. A trivial explanation could be that groups take time to interact or to discuss or to coordinate, which could be kind of a simple explanation here. And when we look at break it up by interaction style, we also see that the less fluent ones are the co-creation pairs here that do turn-taking. It takes more coordination, possibly. Originality, don't actually see a lot of difference here. I would have loved to show some differences in originality, but it seems to be pretty much the same that goes on. You observe, however, that with feedback, people really change their behavior in this towards making more original figures, which you could say again is expected given that we provide feedback on originality. But there's really not a lot of difference here.
Is each dot like average originality of the figures? Of the
Yeah,
pairs?
yes, I did that here. Of course, in this case, we can also do it on the figure level, right? We can do a multi-level. Well, I've done that also, but I thought I'd just keep the same style here because many of the measures that we have here are aggregates. So I'll just here present also the aggregates, but I've done the analysis on the figure level also. So, summary: social interaction modulates aspects of creative search. We both observe general effects of social interaction that seem to change the way that people explore this particular landscape of solutions, right? And especially we observe that when we introduce interaction, it seems to stimulate exploration, so people explore more. Also stimulates flexibility. They stay shorter in these different phases, right? We don't see any effect on fluency, possibly, or we see opposite effects of fluency. Individuals are more fluent, possibly because we don't ask people to make as many figures as possible. We also observe that different interaction dynamics actually modulate these aspects of unfolding creativity, right? So this kind of fast turn-taking or co-creation leads to more exploration, more flexibility, and it's kind of up in the air, but I don't think that we, so the reason that I put a little question mark here is that we made a first report of these data only on the no feedback data, and there we seem to have a result suggesting that fast turn-taking also gives more original figures, but we have quite a few data points there, so there's reason to be a little bit skeptical. Let's see. So that's kind of the first observation from this study here. Next, let me present a very related set of questions that I've been exploring with Roberta in the corner. Using a very different method, but trying again to really see if we could tap into the very dynamics of these unfolding creative processes. So we have observed that social interaction mechanics seem to affect creative exploration, and in order to kind of get a more mechanistic or address this in a more mechanistic way, we use some agent-based simulations where we simulated agents. We equipped them with a semantic memory this time, so it's a slightly different type of task. It's a semantic task or a verbal fluency task. But we equipped every agent with a semantic memory that was modeled using kind of a verb-to-vec technique, which allows us to create a memory for animals this time around by taking 240 animals and calculating from the word-to-vec model the semantic distance between every pair of animal. So you can do that by training a model on the full English Wikipedia, for instance, and then you can every word will be represented by a vector of 400 item vector, and by comparing those vectors, we can observe, for instance, that in the full English Wikipedia, the semantic distance between albatross and alligator is 0.35, right? But albatross and ant is only 0.2. So albatross alligator is closer to albatross than ant is, and when you query these models, they tend to capture, you could say, aspects of also how we intuitively, maybe this was not the best example that I chose, but how we intuitively think about things being closer or further away in meaning space. We also here made another type of manipulation. We manipulated the relative degree of cognitive diversity between the agents. So we could imagine that some of us have very similar ways of thinking about animals. Some of us have different experiences. Maybe we have been raised in a different country or in the countryside with a lot of donkeys around or something like that, and that would change how the kind of association strength between various animals. And here what we did was we created some agents that were low in diversity, that is, that were quite more similar in their semantic architectures, and some that were quite different, or we actually parametrically manipulated how much diversity that these agents had in the way that their associations between different animals were organized. And then we gave these animals a kind of divergent thinking task. They had to come up with as many animals as they could think of before they got stuck. And here, getting stuck means that you reach a point in time where no next animal comes to mind, right? So you're kind of listing animals, and at a certain point you kind of exhaust your space, or you have difficulty kind of figuring out what the next animal should be. And the way that we operationalized that was to set a threshold that when agent reached a point in time where the next animal was connected or associated with a distance that exceeded a particular threshold, then they would kind of stop, and they wouldn't be able to kind of jump that distance. So we could then test individual agents. We could ask them to list animals here, but we could also take the same agent and put it together with a fellow agent and have them do this task together where they took turns. And the kind of mechanics here is that the agent would always kind of pick the animal that were closer in semantic space in the individual case, right? So it would go from dog to cat to mouse, right? In the collective space, it would always, this would respond with the animal that was closer to this one in her own space here, right? So dog goes to cat, and then this one would respond to cat, and so on and so forth. And as you can imagine, if you have this very simple dynamics that you always take the one that is closer to the previous one, no matter if it's your own previous or someone else previous, right? So we have the same very simple kind of mechanisms here, but something can happen when you put that mechanism at work in this kind of social context here. Yeah, so at any given turn, the choice of the next animal is the animal closer in semantic space to the previous one, and the game ends when there's no animal with a semantic distance closer than some threshold, right? And that we can think of as some kind of cognitive fixation. Already at this point, of course, I have to stress that this is a toy model. It's a proof of concept model. There's many clever ways that we humans can solve this game where we are not only responding to like the one previous animal, but at least here the idea is to investigate if we have this kind of mechanics that work on the individual case, what happens automatically or what emerges when we put that to work in this kind of social context here. So all game animals play 240 games here, seeded with different starting animals. And the idea again here is to go and look at what is the kind of search trajectory that unfolds here. So we can think about this scenario here as if we were tasked with this task, what could happen is that we would start with some kind of prototypical farm animal maybe, And we'll do a few farm animals until we kind of are exceeding that or exhausting that space, and then maybe we'll jump to the savanna and do some savanna animals, right? And we might do some birds and some polar animals. So we will again have a situation where some of these would be very short distances that we jump in semantic space, and sometimes we would then make some longer jumps, and we can kind of think about these as phases of exploitation and exploration. So this time around, again, actually following from Guilford's original work, we will look at fluency. How many animals are agents able to name before they experience this kind of cognitive fixation? We'll also look at flexibility, which is what is the kind of distances that agents will jump in order to visit various parts of the solution space here, where you would say flexibility here means that you are able to make, maybe alone or maybe together, longer jumps also in the space that brings you to maybe more distal parts of the solution space. And then we can also look at originality, so what is the relative frequency of particular animals being brought up or being mentioned or listed across files. When we are comparing individuals and pairs, the good thing is that these individuals, they don't really have a memory, so you can ask them to do the game many times, and that will not affect the previous runs, would not affect their future runs. So we can have the same agent doing the task alone and doing the task with someone else, and then we can measure collective benefit. That is, how much better or worse is the pair than the better agent member of the pair when she works alone. And so in other words, we can ask to what extent does the agents benefit from working together relative to when they work alone. There's a number of other measures that we could take and that we also plan to take in future work here, but this is the one that we will report today. And just to give you kind of an idea of what it looks like when you ask agents to do this game, here is some data from diversity level 2. That means a low diversity level here, and one of the agents, or in this case we seed with goat. That's the starting point, right? And agent 1 here says goat, sheep, cow, chicken, reindeer, grizzly bear, polar bear, black bear, tapir, caiman, sea snake, coal snake. You can see that there is actually some patterns here that are maybe not too different from the way that we as humans would approach this task, although there are also once in a while some surprises. Agent 2 here goes a little bit differently, right? Goat, chicken, pig, sheep, cow, reindeer, but still kind of stay within. They bring in reindeer quite easy. Grizzly bear, polar bear, so on and so forth, right? And then if you put them together, we have kind of a third pattern here that is there's something different happening when they interact that is not a perfect copy of what goes on here, right? If we jump now to diversity level 7, they are already, so the agents themselves, because of the way that the operational diversity here have slightly different path here. We go from goat to lobster to ladybug, beetle, mongoose, and so on like that. But that we observe that agent 2 has a very different kind of a set of associations that they bring in, and when we now look at their joint pattern, that doesn't really look almost like any of these other ones. So they seem to kind of bias or prime each other to visit areas that they are not really kind of visiting on their own. Another way of looking at this is mapping it onto some kind of space here, where we observe that one of the individuals in diversity level 2 here would have this kind of search pattern where you would say the blue line here is an expression of the kind of jumps that they make, and all the little dots here are the animals that they visit. Yeah?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand how you got to the different diversity levels.
Yeah, okay. I can briefly, I might have passed over that a little bit quickly here. So, what we can do when we want diversity is, so one thing that we tried out was just to introduce a little bit of noise on these distances, right? So you can induce a bit of noise, but then what happens is that suddenly you're also changing the space. So we ended up doing something different. That was Roberta came up with the idea that we could actually we could shuffle some animal names. If we just take a few of those that are maybe quite close in space and just change the names of them, we kind of still maintain the same overall architecture of the space, but suddenly that would mean that it's not bear that is connected to albatross by 0.14, but maybe bat that is. And then if we shuffle around a few, then we have low diversity. If we shuffle around more, we have medium diversity, and if we shuffle around many animals, we get a lot of diversity. So that's the operationalization here. Did that help? Yeah, good. Good, so here's another way to show it, and here we have an individual doing this particular type of search, and we have the pair doing it together, and we observe that the path itself is not so different, right? The particular behavior, search behavior, seem to have some of the same kind of elements of local and global search. However, if we look at that diversity level 7, we see something slightly different. Here's an individual, and here's the pair doing it together, and we see this very kind of jumpy pattern with a lot of long exploratory jumps. Let's jump to the results here. I'm wrapping up now. So in terms of fluency, here we have diversity level so with low diversity and medium and high diversity, and then we have fluency. That is the number of animals that you are able to mention, and as a group, and then we have collective benefit here, meaning that if you have a gray note here, then you are actually not better than the best individual working alone. If it's red, you are better, right? So what we observe is that as quite naturally, if there's no diversity, then you cannot be better, because then you're producing exactly the same behavior as a pair as if you did the task yourself, right? But as we kind of increase diversity, we seem to have a regime here with kind of intermediate level diversity where we start to see some kind of collective benefit where the agents are somehow gaining an advantage of working together in terms of fluency.
And just to understand the assumption correctly, so I guess in this setup you can never be worse than the best of the two individuals.
I guess you could, because if you were able to produce, let's say, 82 animals on your own,
yeah,
but I, at a very early point in time, says Kiwi,
You're dead.
then you're dead. Kiwi came up as one of the stop points often. Kiwi is this small bird from New Zealand, and in the English Wikipedia it's more connected to other fruits than to other animals. So if Kiwi comes up, then actually as a pair we can get worse.
but it never happens then, because it starts at 0, the collective benefit, right? In the scale on the right. The legend.
Oh yeah, but that's me forcing that.
Okay. Yeah.
You can definitely. So here you're much worse than the better.
Okay, then I'm with. That was what I wasn't understanding.
Yeah. So you can see actually in some sense, Yeah, what is happening here is that there are actually some regimes here where you are worse than the better member, and there's some regime here where you gain a benefit from working together. Yes, Kent?
I'm just trying to get the stopping. So if I go kiwi, why is it that the other one?
Yeah, that's because
There must be a word, like a
it's
animal which is closest related to it, right?
Yeah,
But it
so but
might
it
be
might,
very far away.
so it might be that in my space, kiwi is close to many animals, right? But in your space, it's very far away from a lot of animals, right? Or we already have mentioned those who are close, so now you kind of get below the threshold. If,
Okay, so there's a
yeah.
threshold. Yes.
Yeah. So that's that's a threshold. Exactly.
The reason you get worse when diversity is high is because it increases the odds that I say something which has no.
Yeah, which brings me to a place where I don't have any associations. Yeah. About threshold, and so we see that as we get to a certain point here, and it just totally breaks down. And so maybe you noticed that already at diversity level 7 that I showed before, we seem to get quite jumpy behaviors, right? So we of course don't know how this exactly maps onto any kind of realistic human data, right? It might be that actually these are very unfeasible diversity values that would be difficult to find people that would have so different ways of thinking about animals, right? So this is again kind of a proof of concept model, but the model suggests that there can be too much diversity out there, and then you wouldn't be able to gain a benefit.
Are the agents always matched for diversity, or
Sorry?
are the agents always matched for diversity, or do they ever have different?
Yes, they are matched
So
for
there are
it.
groups, there are batches of participants that interact with themselves, and each batch is defined by how much diversity there is within that batch.
Yeah. Here's flexibility, that is again, so the kind of average length of jumps that you would make in space relative to your own space. We could also make it relative to someone else's space or the partner space. But here's your own space, and what we see is that as you interact with again some regime of diverse agents, then there's something happening, right? You're kind of starting making more exploratory style behavior here, and that's also kind of where you tend to become more jumpy than your partner. Oh, sorry, than you yourself when you work alone. That's what I wanted to say. So more. Maybe we could think about it as a kind of cognitive flexibility, so ability to make longer jumps in semantic space. And last but not least, system extension without originality. So here again, actually the results are a little more subtle, but again there are regimes here where we seem to observe that that agents tend to find their way to those particular slightly more rare animals that are not mentioned by many agents, in particular kind of around diversity level 5, 6, 7, there, something like that. So, in summary, social interaction seems again to modulate divergent thinking processes or affect the way that the cognitive search pattern unfolds, and in this case, contingent on the level of cognitive diversity. So contingent on how similar or different we are in our kind of cognitive makeup. Pairs do not always have an advantage, so if pairs are very similar in their cognitive makeup, they don't really gain any particular benefit from working together because they provide redundant behavior, so to speak, right? So if we are perfectly kind of aligned in how we associate these animals, then an individual search pattern would be perfectly identical to a collective one. We also observe here that if agents are too different, actually it seems that they can kind of obstruct each other's search. So it seems that it can cause too disparate and jumpy search pattern that has these kind of detrimental effects. And so it might be that if I'm just in my getting started with farm animals, and you're already kind of jumping to Australia, right? Then I might lose it. That seems to be happening here. So, but with moderate levels of cognitive diversity, it seems that we have increased cognitive flexibility, and it seems to help the agents escape actually cognitive fixation and lead to advantages, helping them to be more fluent, that is, produce more solutions, right? But also to reach more original solutions. So there's a lot more work to be done here in stressing this model further, and maybe adding more kind of elements of ecological human behavior, right? But from this kind of very simple mechanics, these are the kind of emergent effects that we observe, and the kind of overarching picture that seems to be evolving from this is that that individuals seem to be really good at sometimes staying and exhausting a local neighborhood, but might often not really be good at covering the whole space here. So they might exhaust a few spaces, but they might forget, for instance, that there are 16 million insects that they could have mentioned, right? But that never comes to mind. It seems that groups are really good at broadly covering the space, but seems to often actually sometimes leaving a particular domain of solutions a little prematurely, right? So they have a tendency maybe to jump a little bit too much. So while they are kind of covering the space here, they forget all these birds here and all these farm animals here, because they kind of leave a particular cluster of solutions a little bit too fast, right? So this could be the kind of dynamics, and that means that in many cases, if we just look at the offline results, individuals and pairs are not that different, but it seems that they go through different processes that, that the way that they reach those solutions are by very different types of processes that might be either more kind of lean toward exploitation or more lean toward more exploration. So that's the point for today.